This is the second installment of my efforts to unpack some of what is in Roland Barthes' very dense The Rhetoric of the Image. So, in the second portion, what Barthes does is he differentiates three separable images in the Panzani ad. Barthes asserted that the literal image is denoted, while the symbolic image is connoted, and proceeds to analyze the linguistic message, the denoted image, and the connoted image. And all of this I've got on a text, which I will post in Canvas underneath this video. When considering whether there is always textual matter in, under, or around an image, Barthes sides with the word, asserting that the linguistic message is indeed present in every image, as title, caption, accompanying press article, film dialogue, comic strip balloon. So while this might be slightly overstated, we don't run into a lot of images that are just standalone images with no text whatsoever attached to them. He then posits two functions of the linguistic message to the twofold iconic message, anchorage and relay. He asserts that all images are polysemous, so that refers to the fact that they have multiple meanings. They signify multiple things. This is also true of words, but possibly less so because of technologies such as dictionaries. Still, when you hear a word with the sound bear, you don't know if it is referring to B-E-A-R or B-A-R-E. You don't know if it means sort of the big furry creature that lives in the woods, or does it mean naked, or does it mean the sort of ability to carry something or endure something. So regular words are polysemous, and Barthes would seem to say that pictures are even more polysemous. Barthes claims that polysemy poses a question of meaning, and this question always comes through as dysfunction. Hence, in every society, various techniques are developed intended to fix the floating chain of signifieds in such a way as to counter the terror of uncertain signs. And the history of the creation of dictionaries is possibly one of those technologies to counter the terror of uncertain signs. He then describes text accompanying an image as denoted description of the image that helps the viewer choose the correct level of perception, and asserts that the text has a repressive value that prevents the polysemy of the image to run free. So if we think of sort of Western discourse is often divided into two things. There's the Apollonian, which is reason, and the Dionysian, which is passion. And so he would, I think, assert that images are more Dionysian than words are. And so what the words are going to do is they are going to restrain you. They're going to prevent you from running wild with all the Dionysian polysemy that would be in an image. Barthes claims that anchorage is the most frequent function of the linguistic message, whereas relay is less common and less powerful. Relay occurs when text and image stand in complementary relationship, as they do in cartoons and comic strips. So you see a comic strip, and a lot of the setup is presented there visually, but then what one character says to another is presented in text. And so the job that the text is doing there is sort of ancillary and secondary. The job that the picture is doing, it's giving in lots of description of the scene without having to put in a lot more words. But so he would say text that accompanies picture is more often than not an anchor, and when it does that, it's doing something quite powerful. And then there are cases where it is just a relay, so that way the picture and the text are operating in a complementary relationship. He then moves on to the denoted image. Barthes posits a utopian denoted image, free of any connotations, which he describes as, quote, radically objective or innocent, before returning to the notion of the photograph as a message without a code, which he explains further in connection to drawings, which are coded messages. Drawings are coded at multiple levels, including the fact that, quote, to reproduce an object or scene in a drawing requires a set of rule-governed transposition, and that the coding of a drawing immediately necessitates a certain division between the significant and the insignificant. The drawing does not reproduce everything. So I've got a couple images here of drawings where you can see that just a few lines are very suggestive. And so in that case, the person who's doing the drawing has used a code to identify what was essential. Just put in the essential and you get the idea of what the drawing is. If we think back to the chapter called The Nature and Power of Images, we will recall the point the author made about how cave paintings and children's drawings share the inclusion of only essential characteristics of the things depicted. While a photographer can choose framing, distance, lighting, focus, speed, a photographer cannot choose to include some features and ignore others within a reproduced subject without resorting to trick photography. Barthes writes, "The denotation of the drawing is less pure than that of the photograph, for there is no drawing without style." He goes on to argue that photographs are fundamentally different from films, which represents the final stage in a progression from cave paintings to realistic painting to film, whereas a photograph stands outside of that continuum. He calls the photograph a flat anthropological fact, at once absolutely new and definitively unsurpassable. Humanity encountering for the first time in its history messages without a code. The main point that Barthes wants to make in this section comes when he writes that the denoted image plays a special place in the general structure of the iconic messages. It innocents the semantic artifice of connotation, which is extremely dense, especially in advertising. So if you think back to the photograph of the shopping bag, like a cornucopia, spilling out a mixture of canned and cellophane-wrapped Panzani products, along with fresh tomato and pepper and garlic. The fact that this is an objective photograph denoting those items serves to conceal all the artifice that Barthes had previously identified in the connotations of a fresh, all-natural, full-service, home-cooked meal. Finally, Barthes writes, "This is without doubt an important historical paradox. The more technology develops the diffusion of information, and notably of images, the more it provides the means of masking the constructed meaning under the appearance of the given meaning." So that covers the first two-thirds of the Barthes article, and I think what I've done is pointed to some of the points that I believe he's making that might have been a little difficult for you to pull out from a fairly densely written essay. So let me save this and post it to Canvas, and I'll be back in touch with you shortly.